The United Nations is this week observing the International Day of U.N. Peacekeepers, which officially falls on May the 29th, marking the 75th anniversary of peacekeeping in the global organization. Since 1948, more than 2 million peacekeepers from 125 countries have since served in 71 operations around the world. Currently, 87,000 women and men are serving in 12 conflict zones across Africa, Asia, Europe and the Middle East. To mark the occasion, the SABC's Sherwin Bryce-Pease sat down with the head of UN peace operations under Secretary General Jean-Pierre Lacroix for a deep dive into some of the most complex operations currently underway in Africa. Here now is that discussion.
Secretary General Jean-Pierre Lacroix, welcome to SABC News.
Good to be with you.
We are having this conversation just days ahead of the official commemoration of International Day of United Nations Peacekeepers, marking the 75th anniversary of UN peacekeeping with current operations in 12 theatres, 6 in Africa, where the going has been particularly tough in recent years. What is your key message given the various cross-currents peace operations are confronting today, particularly in places where there often is no peace to keep?
Well, I think the main message is that in spite of all the challenges, our peacekeepers make a huge difference every single day. I will give you 2 examples. One is the preservation of ceasefires, the prevention of resumption of hostilities. For example, in southern Lebanon, when we have this operation called UNIFIL, and where every day you have small incidents that could easily escalate into potentially a resumption of hostilities. The second example is protection of civilians. Every single day we have our peacekeepers are protecting hundreds of thousands of civilians. Again, another example, in the DR Congo, in spite of all the challenges, a very difficult situation in that country, we have IDP camps, some of them with tens of thousands of civilians. I visited one in Ituri province with more than 40,000 IDPs, internally displaced persons,
right,
totally protected by our peacekeepers. Now, the challenges are real, of course, but I think it needs to be highlighted that our peacekeepers are making this tremendous difference every single day.
Despite what you say, USG, I would argue that we often don't hear about these successes of UN peacekeeping. It only seems to make news when a convoy is attacked, when peacekeepers are killed, or when protesters in country are demanding the exit of UN peacekeepers, as we have seen in places like the DRC in Mali and the Central African Republic, to mention a few. One increasingly gets a sense that UN peacekeepers are not always welcome in the places where they operate due to perceptions around efficiencies or efficacy. What is your analysis of those sentiments?
Right. Well, I think, first of all, when you talk about the perception of the population, yes, there is and there can be frustrations resulting from the discrepancy between the expectations, particularly the expectations resulting from our protection of civilian mandate and what our peacekeeping operations can achieve. However, when I visit these places where our peacekeepers are active, like, for example, recently in Gao in Mali, or in the DRC in Ituri province or in South Kivu, we see expression of gratitude by the population. The question is, how can we do better, and how can we better meet the expectations, particularly resulting from this protection of civilian mandates?
Right. I'm glad you mentioned mandates, right? UN peace operations are based on mandates that are handed down by the UN Security Council. Their success or failures often stem from dynamics on the ground, shifting political dynamics, insecurity fueled by asymmetric warfare, as we see in Mali and the DRC. Are missions being given mandates that they simply cannot fulfill?
I believe that there is a discrepancy between the mandates that were being given and the resources that are provided to our peacekeeping mission. Let me just give you one example. When the mandate of our mission in Mali, MINUSMA, was extended to the center of that country, the mission was not given any additional capacities, and we kept telling the members of the Security Council since then, this is a mission that is undercapacitated relative to the mandate that it was given, that yes, there is a responsibility of the member states to provide those missions with adequate capacities.
So let's take the DRC as an example, right? MONUSCO and before that MONUC, established as far back as 1999. What does it say about the effectiveness of diplomacy, coupled with the work that peacekeepers have to do, when almost 25 years later we still see widespread insecurity in that country's east? Is this a story of success, failure, or something in between?
All right. Well, I think it's important to emphasize that this is a country that has essentially only 3 provinces, and I don't want to minimize, of course, what is happening in those 3 provinces in the eastern DRC, but the rest of the country is essentially stable.
Fair point. Fair point. Right.
MONUSCO actually was able to withdraw from these provinces, for example, recently Kasai or Tanganyika. Now, the situation that we're facing in the eastern DRC is very complex, and it's also very much a regional situation. You have the phenomenon of illegal exploitation of natural resources, which is a major driver of conflict. You have a history of tension between various groups. And I believe that what is important there is to bring together all the goodwill from the UN, from the region, the Eastern African Community, the African Union, of course, all these regional partners who are willing to work together with the DRC authorities to help address these key challenges so that we can restore peace in a durable manner. And it's not only about a military operation, it's also about political efforts. So this is why the UN actively supports political efforts by regional actors to address the challenges of Eastern DRC.
In that eastern region, the peacekeeping mission has been criticized by locals for not adequately protecting civilians, which has fueled an anti-MONUSCO sentiment. These sentiments are often very difficult to reverse. What does the way forward look like in the DRC?
Yes, I think first of all, we need to continue our work to improve the capacity, improve the impact of peacekeeping operations. Again, when I visit some of the areas where the population is actively protected and the protection is visible, then you can see that there is obviously gratitude for the population. But yes, there is that frustration resulting from the discrepancy between our means, our capacity, and the complexity of the situation, the multiplicity of armed groups, the terrain, the density of the population. So efforts on capacities, efforts to better coordinate and cooperate with the other stakeholders, the forces that are now deployed by regional actors, of course, the forces of the DRC group, themselves. Yeah. And also make sure that this is complemented by political efforts. Again, this is a situation that cannot be solved politically.
Has the Force Intervention Brigade, for example, which was a sort of new thinking, right, not precedent-setting in UN peacekeeping, but certainly something new, this offensive force that was supposed to sort of grapple with the proliferation of these armed groups, whether it's M23, Codeco, ADF, and the list goes on. Has it had the impact that you desired?
Well, I think that if you look at what happened recently, then the MONUSCO as a whole and the Force Intervention Brigade has had a role in, for example, protecting Goma, and it's still doing that. And I'm thinking in particular in the key area of Sake, where MONUSCO and in particular the Force Intervention Brigade is present. They're playing an important role. Now, what I think we need to do is, again, we need to strengthen the cooperation. We have the armed forces of the DRC. They have their own challenges. I think this is acknowledged by the DRC authorities themselves. We have our own challenges, and I think we should not shy away from acknowledging those challenges. But I think we need to look forward. We need to have a better cooperation and coordination between the various forces that should be working together in Eastern DRC, particularly in North Kivu, not forgetting Ituri, by the way, and the other provinces that are also affected by other armed groups.
So let's move from Central Africa to West Africa. We've witnessed a particularly tense relationship between the UN and the government of Mali that ordered the MINUSMA human rights chief to leave the country. He was accused of subversive actions amid escalating human rights concerns in that country. Earlier this year, independent human rights experts working with the UN called for investigations into possible abuses, war crimes, and crimes against humanity conducted by both Malian government forces and mercenaries from Russia's Wagner Group. What's your sense of where we go from here in Mali?
Right. Well, first of all, I want to highlight that we have continuous relations, continuous engagement with the Malian authorities at all levels. Myself, the head of the mission, MINUSMA, and all other colleagues. I'm not saying that we don't have issues. Of course, we have, but it isn't like the relation is a bad one. Now,
it certainly looks that way.
Yes, but I wouldn't characterize those relations as bad relation with the Malian authorities. Again, we are very transparent. We have a very candid dialogue with the Malian authorities. And also we report on issues that we have on a very transparent manner. For example, yes, we continue to have some restrictions that are imposed to our mission, particularly when it comes to flights and more specifically drones. We also have occasions where ground movements are restricted. There are not that many, but they are relevant, they're significant. And as you know, coming to human rights, we've had restrictions when it comes to the ability of the mission to send joint investigative teams to locations where allegations of violations of human rights have occurred.
So at the very least, this is a frustrating relationship.
Well, it's a relation with issues. I have to tell you, though, that, and I don't want to minimize, but it isn't like we're not used to having sometimes difficult relation with the host government. I can think of many other missions where the relations have not been easy. However, what is the point there? First, we believe that MINUSMA continues to play an important role, and I believe that this is an overall sentiment that is shared by most of the member states, particularly members of the Security Council and also members of the region to whom we have been discussing with lately. I don't believe personally that this is the view of the Malian authorities, that they don't want MINUSMA anymore, but of course I cannot talk on their behalf. However, in our regular discussions with the Malian authorities and more in my last visit to Bamako, to Mali, we actually received quite a long list of expectations from the Malian authorities as to what MINUSMA could do and should do in Mali, and that includes continue to support the political transition with a view to holding election next year, continue to support the implementation of the peace agreement, the so-called Algiers Agreement, the implementation of which is too slow, and many other areas, including support to the Malian Armed Forces, which is something that we do on a regular basis. Now, there are some areas where there are some critics or even complaints from the Malian authorities. You refer to the question of the mandate of MINUSMA given by the Security Council regarding human rights. The recent joint report by the High Commissioner of Human Rights and the mission regarding alleged violation of human rights in Mora was not well received in Bamako. But on the other hand, we believe that from the point of view of the authorities in Mali, there are expectations that MINUSMA should continue implementing its mandate and like I said, supporting the political processes that are ongoing in that country.
What's your reading of the Wagner Group, right, or mercenaries operating, and how do they impugn or affect the operations of UN peacekeeping in Africa?
Yeah, well, I think that what we've been constantly saying is that this is not for the UN in principle to tell member states that they should or should not partner with any entity, be it a government or a private entity. But what we're looking at is the impact. In other words, is that partnership affecting in any way the ability of our mission to implement their mandate?
Answer that question. Is it?
Well, in some cases we've had issues, not only in Mali, and I would say probably in other situations we
Central
have.
African Republic?
Exactly. Although I believe that things have improved in the Central African Republic when it comes to these kind of restrictions, and we're also looking. So one thing is if there is an impact in terms of the ability of our mission to operate without restriction. The other thing is there an impact of these partnership when it comes to the situation of human rights? And here...
And the protection of civilians, right? I mean...
And therefore the protection of civilians. And there, yes, there are concerns. They are actually manifested in particular by this joint report that I referred to by the High Commissioner of Human Rights and MINUSMA. What we're expecting from the Malian Authority is that they should conduct thorough judicial investigations so that there will be accountability for the perpetrators of this violation of human rights. And I want to insist that in our discussion with the authorities in Mali, they do acknowledge that you cannot build sustainable peace and durable peace without respecting human rights. This is, what we hear from them. Well, there are serious allegations and documented by this report. So now the next step belongs to the Malian authorities, and we expect them and we hope that they will be proceeding with the relevant investigations.
I want to touch a bit on Sudan. Two military factions going at each other. We see growing insecurity and tribal concerns in places like Darfur, where until a few years ago the UN had a peacekeeping mission, given the genocidal atrocities committed in that region. How concerned are you, USG, that the withdrawal of UNAMID from Darfur has again left this region particularly vulnerable to forces running amok today?
Yeah. Well, I think we need to remember that UNAMID was withdrawn. I mean, there had been a process of gradual sort of drawdown, but essentially it was withdrawn as a result of the political changes in Sudan and the determination of the new authorities that they didn't want to continue with UNAMID. Now, we have a new situation which is of utmost concern in Sudan, and also with the potential impact on neighboring countries, including countries and territories where we have important peacekeeping operations. I think the question that you're asking really is, when you think of a peacekeeping mission, which is, as I indicated, making a difference in protecting civilians, in mitigating the violence, but with challenges and issues, and which is not in a position to fully meet expectations, as is the case with many of the big operations. Right. You also need to ask your question, is there an alternative? What is the alternative? Sometimes it's not a question, it's even not a question of alternative versus peacekeeping operation versus something else. A question of how can we use different tools of the international community
of persuasion.
I mean, political tools, humanitarian tools, peacekeeping tools, but also sometimes enforcement tools, so as to achieve the best results. A case-by-case determination that has to be made, but there is no one. There is no magic wand. There's no situation can be addressed only by one tool, peacekeeping operation, or any other outfit.
But the longer this conflict goes on, right, doesn't it increase the case for a return, possibly, of peacekeeping to that country?
Well, I think we're very far. We're
jumping the gun.
Really jumping ahead, yeah, because the immediate priority is obviously to try to achieve a durable ceasefire so that there can be a humanitarian relief brought to the population. And hopefully there will be, this will happen, and then we'll have a political process that will lead to a more sort of durable solution for Sudan. It would be for the member states to decide at some point, if, and of course with the whatever authorities there can be in Sudan moving, down the road.
But you surely, USG, do not wait for member states, right, to deliver a mandate. You think about these things way ahead of time, do you not? Surely.
Well, we do think of that, of course. We don't want to jump too far ahead, but at the same time, we have an experience in planning and presenting options to our member states. I don't think we're there at all in Sudan, but certainly the concerns in terms of the impact of that situation on the population are really very, very serious.
Couple more questions for you. How do you read the issue regarding the financing of AU-led operations, which have been a major issue between the UN and the AU since around 2007? Given the AU's proactive role on matters of peace and security in Africa, the AU's Achilles heel remains the lack of adequate resources to support and sustain these operations. What would such predictable funding mean for UN peacekeeping operations, and is this a matter you expect to be resolved before the end of the year?
Now, we are squarely in favor of more support to African peace enforcement operations, and particularly AU operations. And we believe that whenever needed, there should be sustainable, durable financing, including to assess contributions. It's not a question of peacekeeping versus peace enforcement. It's a question of what is the best tool for specific situations. But in some cases, you have no peace to keep, and enforcement is required. And this is not something that even robust peacekeeping can do. It has to be done by the AU, regional, sub-regional organization, and these operations need to be better supported financially with the adequate, robust mandate, and with, if needed and if required, other forms of support by the UN. So we hope that there will be progress on that front. There is a joint African Union UN report that is about to be issued. Hopefully this will elicit reactivation of the debate on that important issue.
But you make the point, right? The broader point is a case-by-case analysis is absolutely important, because theatres are quite different. Final question for you. I know there continue to be engagement with South African authorities and other authorities around the pursuit of claims related to paternity and child maintenance support arising from sexual abuse and exploitation at missions. Your victims' right advocate Jane Connors visited South Africa in April to pursue this agenda. Can you tell us what those engagements have delivered, and has there been forward movement?
Yes. No, I think that the involvement of and the engagement really of the South African authorities is quite positive, and we're really we encourage the South African authorities to continue along that path. I believe that in terms of making sure that first of all, DNA samples are collected so that there can be identification of children and father, and that eventually adequate support can be provided.
But essentially, you're saying there are kids in, for example, the DRC that don't know who their father is, but it was a blue helmet that worked for the SABC.
Well, exactly. These are the kind of cases that we want to solve, and I believe that we have a very long way to go along that, on these particular situations. But I also believe that South Africa is, pioneering a much more engaged, constructing form of cooperation with the UN on that particular theme. So, this is really a model that we, of course, encourage the South African Authority to sort of expand on, but at the same time, we also encourage other countries with similar cases to replicate that kind of approach.
Final question. Are you embracing technology in a much bigger way? It's 2023. I mean, what role does tech play in your operations?
Yeah. We have launched what we call the strategy for the digital transformation of peacekeeping, and basically...
Sounds like the right thing to do.
Indeed. I mean, the rationale is, digital technologies are, first of all, we started using them, of course, in many areas, and those who are not interested in our success, I mean, the armed groups, and they're also using these technologies in various ways. Disinformation, misinformation, and more sophisticated attacks against our peacekeepers. So essentially the goal of that strategy is, first of all, what I would call elevate the digital literacy of our personnel, because there's a lot of need for training and more better preparedness. Second, what are the key objectives? We try to identify the key objectives of this sort of upgrade in our ability to use digital technology. One is better security and safety for our peacekeeper. Second, counter disinformation, misinformation. Third, improve our ability to collect information and process information. All of this needs to be done according to the ethical standards of, let's say, that are relevant to the use of these digital technologies. So we're working on all these work strands. We need the support of our member states because this is costly and it will take a lot of time.
And then there's also artificial intelligence. I wonder how that's going to impact peacekeeping in the future, right?
Absolutely. I believe that, as in many other areas, there will be a positive impact and also many dangers.
Under-Secretary General for UN Peace Operations, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, merci beaucoup. Thank you, sir, very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you.
All the best.
Thank you.